Test, 1, 2, 1, 2. We will talk about that in just a moment. Yes. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started because it's 6:32, and I always try to be very respectful of your time. As soon as I can get this microphone clipped to me, I'll just put it in my pocket. I hear a couple more voices coming. So while everyone's getting settled, I have some handouts that I've printed out. In the past, you've heard me talk about them. One is this 52-week Bible reading plan. If you don't have one or have never used one, this is exceptionally good because it gives you, the columns are the categories. So let's say this year, it's like I've never really focused much on the Old Testament. Well, if you look at the columns, there's columns for that. The law, that's the 5 books of Moses, which we're covering in this series. They have that. So what you would do is you would read the law section, and you would just go down that column. You'd read that every day. And trust me, by the end of the year, you would know the law, or the history, or the Psalms, or the poetry, or the prophecy, or the gospel. So it is backed by the library. On the wall is a rack, and it's like a 3 or 4 slotted rack. So I have some of these in the rack right back by the library. Then I also have, these are the Hall of Fame chapters of the Old Testament. To those of you who are overachievers, if you memorize this, oh my goodness, what a tool you would have in your mind. So that's the Hall of Fame chapters of the Old Testament. Turn it over, there's the New Testament. So it's a wonderful tool. If you would memorize that, you would be way ahead of the game. And we should have had enough handouts, everyone that wanted one. We're good? Okay, because I can always make more. I got a spare right here, so I can make extra copies. Well, like last week, this is without the rain. Yay, that's nice. We're not doing this during a hurricane or whatever. That was pretty impressive, the rain. But so today we're going to look at the book of Numbers. I'm going to kind of follow the format that we did last week. So I have a little video overview, and then we'll just kind of go through and hit high points from the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers is actually, a lot more interesting to read than the Leviticus was, although the Leviticus had some interesting stuff in it. The book of Numbers is another very good book. So I'm going to go ahead and we will start. This is where the title of the book comes from. Numbers 1, verses 1 through 3. The Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting in the desert of Sinai on the first day of the 2nd month of the 2nd year after the Israelites came out of Egypt. He said, "Take a census of the whole Israelite community by their clans and families, listing every man by name, one by one. You and Aaron are to number by their divisions all the men in Israel 20 years old or more who are able to serve in the army." So that census is where we get the Numbers title. The the Jewish people they call it in the wilderness, which I actually kind of like that title better than Numbers, because of course the story is going to be about their wilderness travel. Hello? There we go. Okay, here's the video overview.
The book of Numbers. This 4th book of the Bible carries forward the story of Israel after their exodus from slavery in Egypt. God had brought them to Mount Sinai, and he entered into a covenant with them there. And despite Israel's rebellion, God had graciously provided a way for Israel to live near his holy presence in the tabernacle. So the book of Numbers begins as Israel wraps up their 1-year stay at Mount Sinai, and they head out into the wilderness on their way to the land that God promised Abraham. Now, the book's storyline is designed according to the stages of their journey. So the first section begins at Mount Sinai, but then they set out and travel to the wilderness of Paran. And then from there, they travel to the plains of Moab, which is right across from the Promised Land. Now, the first part opens with a census where the people are numbered. That's where the book gets its name. And then there are laws about how the tribes of Israel were to be arranged in their camp. So the tabernacle was to be at the center, and then around that, the priests and the Levites, and then around them, the 12 tribes neatly arranged with Judah at their head. Now, this was all an elaborate symbol about how God's holy presence was at the center of their existence as a people. This is all followed by a whole series of laws that develop the purity laws from the book of Leviticus. If God's presence was going to be in their midst, every effort should be made to make the camp pure, a place that welcomes God's holiness. In chapter 10, the cloud of God's presence lifts from the tabernacle and guides Israel away from Sinai out into the wilderness, and immediately things go terribly wrong. So in chapter 11, the people start complaining about their hunger and thirst and how they want to go back to Egypt. And then in chapter 12, Moses' own brother and sister begin opposing and bad-mouthing him in front of all of the people. This trip is not off to a good start. The next section begins as the Israelites arrive in the desert of Paran, about halfway to the Promised Land. And God tells Moses to send out the 12 spies, one for each tribe, so they can scout out the Promised Land. So when the spies all return, 10 of them say that there is no chance Israel can survive there because the Canaanites will destroy them. But there are 2 spies, Caleb and Joshua, who say that God can save them. But the 10 whip up the people into a fearful rage, and they start planning a mutiny. They're going to appoint a new leader and head back to Egypt. So God is understandably angry, and Moses intercedes on the people's behalf. He calls God to be faithful to his promises to Abraham. And so God does, but not at the expense of his justice. He gives these Israelites what they want, to not enter the land. And God sentences this generation to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until they die. Only their children will get to enter the Promised Land. Now, you'd think this severe consequence would wake them up, but it gets even worse. So in the next story, there's a whole group of Levites that begin a rebellion, and they challenge Moses and Aaron's leadership, saying that they have gone way too far. So God deals severely with these Levites, and he renews his commitment to Moses and Aaron as Israel's leaders. Now, as they leave the region of Paran and hit the road, it goes downhill yet again. The Israelites start complaining again about their thirst, and they ask why Moses even brought them out of Egypt in the first place. So God tells Moses to speak to a rock to bring out water for all of the people. But Moses doesn't really do this. He oversteps his bounds. He hits the rock twice and then says, "You rebels, do we have to bring water out of this rock?" So Moses dishonors God by putting himself in God's place as the one who brings out the water. And so Moses brings down on himself the same fate as the wilderness generation. He too will die in the desert and never get to enter the Promised Land. After this, the Israelites rebel yet again, and God brings a very strange judgment on them, venomous snakes to come and bite the people. And so Moses again intercedes on behalf of the people. And God tells Moses to do this, to make a bronze snake and to lift it up on a pole, so that whoever looks at this snake would be healed of the poisonous snake bite. It's a very strange symbol, but it speaks to the challenge that God has by being faithful to his covenant. He's right to bring justice on the Israelites' evil and sin, but even God's justice gets transformed into a source of life for those who will look to God for healing. From here, the people head into the plains of Moab, and the first main part of the section focuses on the strange figure of Balaam. So the king of Moab is freaked out at this huge group of people traveling through his territory. So he hires a pagan sorcerer, Balaam, to pronounce curses on Israel. And 3 different times, Balaam finds that he cannot curse them. He can utter only blessing upon Israel. Remember God's promise to Abraham from Genesis 12. So not only can Balaam not curse Israel, but God actually gives him a vision about a future Israelite king who will one day bring God's justice to all of the nations. This vision recalls Jacob's promise to Judah in Genesis chapter 49. Now, it's worth stopping to reflect on the flow of the book so far. The rebellion stories in the wilderness, they just heap up on one another, getting worse and worse. And while God does bring partial acts of judgment on Israel, he's also kept showing mercy, providing food and water along the way. And so the Balaam story, it shows God's grace in bright, colors. Because here's Israel. They're down in the camp grumbling and rebelling, but up in the hills, unbeknownst to them, God is protecting and even blessing them. And it's this contrast between Israel's rebellion and God's faithfulness in the wilderness. That's what made these stories so important for later generations of Israel. So the wilderness stories are retold time and again by later biblical prophets and poets, and even by the apostles in the New Testament. And these stories always serve as a warning that while God will remain faithful to his covenant promises, he will also allow his people to walk away in rebellion and face the consequences. After this, the rest of the book focuses on the children of the wilderness generation, and they begin preparing to inherit the promised land. They take another census of the new generation, then they go on and win a number of battles with the people groups around them, and then a few tribes even begin to settle in the promised land. So the book ends with the new generation poised to enter into the land, and Moses is about to deliver his final words of wisdom and warning. But for now, that's what the book of Numbers is all about.
Okay. All right. I like those because those are a really nice, quick overview. Hello? There we go. All right. So now we're back to Numbers. So yes, and when you think about the story, what did the nation of the Jewish people, what did they just see? They saw 10 absolutely incredible miracles with God in the Exodus, and here they're grumbling. I just find it so amazing, but people are people, aren't they? And I like to think, well, gosh, if I was there, I don't think I would have complained. Oh yeah, I would have. Because that's just the nature of people, how we are. But it is kind of amazing when you think about all the things and miracles they've seen, and still they fuss. So, as I said, the book of Numbers gets its name from the census. The story is about really Israel's journey to obedience and holiness. That's really what it's about. The primary theme focuses on God's faithfulness despite Israel's failures, and which are symbolic of our failures as well. As I mentioned in the cartoon there, that the book of Numbers is divided into 3 sections, and basically it's where they're at. So the first part of the book is they're still at Mount Sinai, and that's where this takes place. So they're at Mount Sinai preparing for their trip to the Holy Land, and God starts them out by organizing them for travel and worship. So they start with the census for the military readiness, and again, that's where the Numbers title comes from. But one of the things God does is he exempts the Levites from military duty because they are the priests. So those guys get exempted. So what's cool is God also gives them instructions on how to camp, and you saw in the cartoon, I'll give you another picture. So when they're set to set up camp, this is what it looks like. If I can get the slide to go. Hello? There. Now, doesn't that look familiar? It's quite fascinating. So as you read the Old Testament, if you're going to go through and use one of these Bible reading plans, always keep your eye out for Jesus in symbolic form or other. But there it is. There's a cross. I mean, it's amazing all the symbology that points to Jesus, and yet they still didn't get it. They still didn't get it. But it looks familiar. There's also another picture of the cross that was very prominent in Old Testament times. It occurs every Passover, and this is not a great picture because I couldn't really find it. But when you skewer your lamb for the Passover cooking, it's that picture on the bottom there, you could see the cross. So they would have one rod that would go from head to tail, and then they would splay the other rod through the top of the chest to splay the animal's legs open so they could cook the meat. But there again, another cross. And of course, the blood of the lamb is put on the doorpost and lintels, which, of course, during the Passover saved them from the angel of death. But all these symbols right in front of their eyes, although this is well before Jesus' time, but if you were looking at it today, I mean, we see these things quite readily. So God shows them how to set up camp. The next thing in chapter 3, he defines the duties of the Levites. So the Levites are accepted by God as the substitute for the firstborn males. Prior to the Levites, remember, every firstborn male was consecrated to God's service. Now that he has the tribe of Levi, they don't have to do that. So in the beginning, or in the rest in chapter 5 now, one of the interesting things you see is there's a public health code. So measures are taken to prevent defilement of the camp by unclean individuals and those who are wrongly commit infidelity. They go out of their way. So it's kind of an interesting thing at this time, so many thousand years ago, that you could kind of look at like they actually kind of had a health code, like a public health code. Another feature of that chapter in number 5 is you get the Nazirite vow. And that is something we'll see in the Old Testament as well. But as with any vow, a vow is always voluntary. The individual who chose to take it, they could declare how long they would be doing this well, really, it was kind of a form of worship. So they would specify the period. So for the next 60 days, I'm going to follow these Nazirite rites, or 2 months, or 6 months, or a year, or for life. Some of the vows were for life. That, like Samson would be a good example of that. Samuel, and there's some others. So the primary part of the Nazirite vow was they would abstain from wine and wine products, including grapes and vinegar, anything made from grapes. The other thing they would do is not cut their hair during the period of their vow. Now, I haven't cut my hair for quite a while, but I'm not a Nazirite, so. But letting it grow long, that was kind of one way you could kind of wonder, oh, well, look how long his hair is. Is he doing a Nazirite vow? You'd kind of set yourself apart that way. That'd be one way. One of the other things they were concerned with is contact with the dead. They had to avoid contact with dead bodies. Even those of close family members, they couldn't partake in helping because they weren't supposed to touch a dead body. The vow can be set for a period, 30 days, 6 months, a year, or even a lifetime. So at the end of your vow, one of the things you did is you shaved your head. So you would shave your head, and then actually the hair would be part of your offering. You'd make an offering, and that would be part of the vow, or part of the offering, rather, that you've completed your vow. John the Baptist, he followed a Nazirite vow. He was from lifetime. Samson, Samuel, those are some of the more common ones. In chapter 6, we have something that I truly love, and this is the Aaronic blessing. You have to be careful. I'm not saying ironic. It's the Aaronic blessing. And you've all heard it, and it is one of the things I really enjoy, is if I'm giving the benediction, I do like to use this. It comes from Numbers chapter 6, verses 22 to 27. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the Israelites. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. So they will put my name on the Israelites, and I will bless them." And that is a wonderful little study if you want to dig into those words and see what that really means. That's an awesome little study. In chapter 7, they consecrate the tabernacle and also the Levites who were going to be taking care of the tabernacle. So the leaders of the tribes bring lavish offerings to the dedications of the tabernacle. The Levites are cleansed and consecrated for the service for the tent of meeting. Remember, we're taking something that is earthly and we're trying to make it holy so that God can dwell with us. So even the people had to go through great steps to not defile the holy. That is a big problem, and you'll see as we get to some of these rebellions and such, some of the things that God does, it's pretty serious. In chapter 9, we have Israel celebrating their first Passover in the wilderness. Now, this isn't their first Passover. Their first Passover was the Passover in Egypt, but this is the first time they're celebrating it in the wilderness. And they're making final preparations to resume the Exodus journey. And they've been at Mount Sinai now by this time for 2 years. So now they finally are leaving Mount Sinai. They're going to be going on to Moab. So this begins the second section of the book of Numbers. And no sooner do they start than guess what? The people start fussing. The people start to complain. Chapter 11, verse 6, but now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. Oh, that we had meat to eat. Numbers chapter 11, verse 4. They remembered the foods they had in Egypt, the fish, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic, but they seem to forget they were slaves. But they're remembering the food, and they're whining about not having the food. So God steps in, and he says, tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you, and when you wailed, if only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt. Not a good thing to say. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. How many parents have used that phrase? Well, I don't know about your house, but yes, and I've used it too. You will not eat it for just 1 day, or 2 days, or 5, 10, or 20, but for a whole month, until it comes out your nostrils, and you loathe it, because you have rejected the Lord. So, yeah, don't make God angry. That's not a good hobby. It really is not. So now we get kind of the turning point in Numbers is the spies. I really like this section. So it really is kind of pivots the whole chapter and the whole kind of what their journey turns from and into. Moses sends out 12 men to spy out the land of Canaan. They find a wealth of produce, but 10 of the 12 bring back an unfavorable report because of the fear of their inhabitants. They have lack of faith. Numbers 13, starting in verse 30. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we certainly can do it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. These are the descendants of Anak, come from the Nephilim. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. Now remember, they were in the land sneaking around for 40 days. That's one of those numbers you see quite a bit pop up, and it will pop up again. Now in chapter 14, let's continue the story. That night all the people of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this desert, why the Lord brings us into this land only to let us fall by the sword. Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. couldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And then they said to each other, "We should change a leader and go back to Egypt." Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole community, Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, forgive my pronunciation, so I may have missed that, who were among those who explored the land, tore their clothes, and they said to the entire Israelite community, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of a people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid." But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. And if I had my little music clip, that would be that dun, dun, dun right there. So, continuing. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the miraculous signs I have performed among them?" So why is God angry? Rightfully so, by the way. 10 of the 12 spies had no faith. They had no faith. God is quite upset. And like we were talking earlier, he had displayed wonderful signs. They were led in the desert by the column of fire, the column of smoke. God was with them all that time to get to the camp. And here they have no faith. So God's going to judge them. So, Numbers 14, verse 30. "Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua son of Nun. As for your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you rejected. But your bodies will fall in the desert. Your children will be shepherds there for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your body lies in the desert. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land. You will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you." So that shifts the rest of the book, obviously. You would think that would have settled it and they all would have lined up and said, "Okay, now we're going to behave." But of all people, we have now another rebellion in chapter 16, and these are the Levites rebelling. Korah and his followers. They questioned Moses and Aaron's leadership, arguing that the entire Israelite community was holy, and therefore no one should hold a higher position. Kind of interesting. I don't know if it's envy or jealousy, but they don't seem to like Moses and Aaron having kind of a privileged status. So in chapter 16, reading at verse 2, "With them there were 250 Israelite men, well known in the community leaders, who had been appointed members of the council. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, 'You've gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?' When Moses heard this, he fell face down. And then he said to Korah and all his followers, 'In the morning the Lord will show who belongs to him and who is holy, and he will have that person come near him. The man he chooses he will cause to come near. You, Korah, and all your followers are to do this. Take censers, and tomorrow put fire and incense in them before the Lord. The man the Lord chooses will be the one that is holy.' When Korah had gathered all his followers in opposition to them at the entrance of the tent of meeting, the glory of the Lord appeared to the entire assembly. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'Separate yourselves from the assembly so I can put an end to them at once.' But Moses and Aaron fell face down and cried out, "O God, God of the spirits of all mankind, will you be angry with the entire assembly when only one man sins?" Then the Lord said to Moses, "Say to the assembly, move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan and Abiram." Moses got up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. He warned the assembly, "Move back from the tents of these wicked men. Do not touch anything belonging to them, or you'll be swept away because of their sins." So they moved away from the tents of Korah, Dathan and Abiram. Dathan and, they keep using that word, and I still haven't figured out how to pronounce it. Dathan and Abiram had come out and were standing there with their wives, children, and little ones at the entrance of their tents. Then Moses said, "This is how you will know the Lord has sent me to do all these things, that it was not my idea. If these men die a natural death and experience only what usually happens to men, then the Lord has not sent me. But the Lord brings about something totally new. And the earth opens its mouth and swallows them with everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the grave. Then you will know that these men treated the Lord with contempt." As soon as he finished saying all this, the ground split apart, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, with their households and all the Korah's men and all their possessions. They went alive into the grave with everything they owned. The earth closed over them, and they perished and were gone from the community. At their cries, all the Israelites around them shouted, "The earth is going to swallow us too." And the fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. Now, we are kind of stubborn people at times, but I would think that would certainly give me an attitude adjustment if the ground suddenly just opened up and swallowed, or the fire of the Lord came down and just took out 250 people. But they're an interesting group. So I bet you would hope that no one challenged Moses and Aaron again after that display. Now I'm going to tell you about, in chapter 19, they talk about the red heifer purification. Have you heard of that before? Do you know that's in the news relatively currently? Are you aware of that? The red heifer purification in chapter 19, that is in the news currently. In September of 2022, 5 red heifers were flown from Texas to Israel, attracting global attention as they are considered a key element in the potential rebuilding of the Third Temple. While initially deemed perfect, some of the heifers have since developed disqualifying white hairs. Despite this, the Temple Institute maintains a red heifer project and continues to care for the remaining heifers with the goal of fulfilling the biblical requirements for a red heifer sacrifice. Have you heard of that before? Because the ashes of the red heifer are used in the consecration of the elements within the temple. So that's why it's so perfect. But if a red heifer develops even a couple hairs that are not red, that disqualifies the heifer. So the red heifer described in the book of Numbers 19, verses 1 to 10, is a critical component in the Jewish tradition for the ritual purification necessary to rebuild the temple. The ashes of a perfectly red heifer are needed for this purification. This is a significant event for both Jewish and some Christian communities, as it's seen as a potential harbinger of the Messiah coming and rebuilding the temple. If you've not ever been on their site, go to the Temple Institute site. You literally can see the elements they have already made for the third temple. I don't know if you realize this, and while this is not a class on the end times or eschatology, they have stuff ready. So as soon as it's built, they have the priestly garbs already made. The trumpets are made. The menorah, you can see it. It's outside the Temple Institute. It's enclosed in glass, and I forget how much gold is on the menorah. So you can actually see these things. When I worked in Toledo, oh my, this has got to be 30 years ago, I met, I would assume he was an Orthodox Jew by his dress and everything, and we were talking, and he told me then about all the warehouses full of stuff they had. That was 30 years ago. So I'll finish this news. Well, it's not a news story, but I'll finish the story here. So currently, those red heifers, 3 of the original 5 remain eligible for sacrifice. So far, no blemishes have developed. They have reached the biblically required age of 3 years. 1 heifer was disqualified last year due to the appearance of white hairs. The Temple Institute is actively managing the red heifers and is working towards the possibility of a red heifer ceremony. In fact, those priests have actually started practicing the rituals they need to do for sacrifice. So that was one of the things supposedly that, when in October, how many years ago, when the Palestinians, it was that concert and they attacked and killed the people, that was a piece of what, well, it was in 22, but that was a piece of why they did it, is because they were scared about this red heifer thing, and if the third temple gets built, that was a part of their motivation. So now we're up to chapter 20 in our review, so we'll kind of go through this. Chapter 20 is not a good chapter for Miriam, Aaron, or Moses, because Miriam dies. Miriam was 127 years old, and she was buried in the wilderness of Zin. Now, flash back to the story in Exodus 2. Moses' basket's put in the river, and his sister watches where he goes, and she follows the basket, and one of the servants of the Pharaoh's daughter gets the basket out, and she sees it's a baby, and then the girl speaks up and says, "Oh, would you like me to find a woman who could nurse the baby?" That was his sister. That was Miriam. So she finally dies at 127 years old. So, all right. Now we're going to go into Moses strikes the rock. So this is where he kind of runs into some trouble. Whoop. That's not a rock. This must I think it jumped by 2. There it is. Do you know that that is the rock they actually think is the rock that Moses struck? It's in Saudi Arabia, and they actually are trying to get people uninterested in this area. The rocks below that split rock are well worn by water erosion. It's a kind of another very interesting thing to look at. You can find it on the internet, so it's got to be true. But they talk about that rock because geologists can't explain the split. They can't. How did that happen? They can't figure that one out. And then when you look around it, there's water erosion, but there's no water there. How did these rocks get so eroded? So this is the story of Moses and his error, his huge error. Numbers 20 in verse 2. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this desert, and we have our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain, no figs, no grapevines, no pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Moses and Aaron went to the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, "Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water." When you will bring the water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in the front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and the livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I gave them." Chapter 20 ends, Aaron dies. So that wasn't a good career move for him to be a part of that striking the rock either. Numbers 20, verses 23. At Mount Hor, near the border of Edom, the Lord said to Moses, "Aaron will be gathered to his people, and he will not enter the land I give the Israelites, because both you have rebelled against my command at the waters of Erbeth. Get Aaron and his son Eleazar and take them up to Mount Hor. Remove Aaron's garments and put them on his son, for Aaron will be gathered to his people, and he will die there." Have you heard the phrase gathered to his people or gathered to his fathers before? What that meant, and back in those days, you had like a family crypt. And then in the crypt was like a pit. And they had several niches in the pit. The freshly departed would get one of the niches. So you literally could go into your family niche and you could look and, well, there's great-great-grandfather. There's great-grandfather, there's grandfather, there's father. You could literally see them. Once they deteriorated enough or they needed the space, the remains then were put into the pit. And you would be gathered, your remains would be gathered, put in this pit. And that's where the other ancestors that are no longer on the niches are in there too. You're gathered to your ancestors. So that's kind of what they were referring to when they say that. But that's the same thing as basically saying you're going to die when God says you're going to be gathered to your ancestors, which he was. Now, chapter 21, the bronze serpent. Now, let's see if I can find that snake. There we go. I always find it interesting. It looks like a medical caduceus, like a symbol you see on the medics and stuff, uniform, nursing pins and things. So, the bronze serpent, this is an interesting story, because one of the things you should always be doing when you're reading, especially Old Testament, always be on the lookout for Jesus in some form. I mean, we look at that, and as Christians, of course, we see Christ on the cross. To us, it's so obvious, but back then, that was well before Jesus on the cross, but how it resonates with us today. Numbers 21, verse 4. They traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom, but the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the desert? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them, and they bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." So Moses made a bronze snake and put it on the pole. Then when anyone was bitten by the snake and looked at the snake, he lived. And that kind of symbolizes, looking back, we can see it symbolizes salvation is through faith alone, because all they had to do is look. All they had to do is look at the snake, and they would be healed. John 3, verse 14. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, so the Son of Man must also be lifted up. This whole concept about we're saved by faith, you could even take it to the thief on the cross. You know, the thief on the cross, he's being crucified beside Jesus Christ, and he could not do anything. He couldn't go and be baptized. He couldn't join a church meeting. He couldn't attend membership classes. But yet, Jesus says to him in Luke 23, "But the other criminal rebuked him. 'Don't you fear God,' he said, 'since you are under the same sentence. We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong.' Then he said to Jesus, 'Remember me when you come into your kingdom.' And Jesus answered him, 'I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise.'" So, you know, there's another example. It's about faith. It's about faith. The last section of the book is they're getting ready to go into the promised land. So they're in the plains of Moab, and they're right across from the promised land. Now, the generation that doubted and that they're all dead, and so 40 years have transpired. And now the new generation, those kids who were under 20, because notice every census it was 20 and above, 20 and above. These are the kids who were under 20. And so the first thing they do, they take another census, because obviously this is going to involve some military action. So they need to know how many soldiers they have potentially. Joshua is selected to succeed Moses as the leader in chapter 27. And then more instructions concerning offerings and feast days are given. The cities for the Levites, the cities of refuge, marriage of female heirs are given. And all this is being preparation for when they get into the promised land. So what will happen, of course, Moses does not get to go to the promised land, but God is going to give him the opportunity to say his last words. So that's what Deuteronomy is going to be about. It's 3 speeches Moses gets to tell the people before he dies. So that will be next week. That will be the conclusion, and that will be the end of the series. So thank you all very much for coming out and doing this. I know this is a little hard, and I know it's a lot of scripture, but again, I feel like I have to kind of tell the story, at least enough so we can get an overview. But Deuteronomy is a wonderful book. Christ quotes Deuteronomy, probably Deuteronomy and Isaiah more than any other book. So it is a very important book. I'd like to close in prayer, since I neglected to open in prayer. So Father God, I thank you for this time. I thank you for each and every person that's here. I thank you for the opportunity to just lead through this study. I've come away with a much deeper appreciation for the books we've looked at, especially Leviticus and Numbers. It's just, there's so much in there. There's so much richness that we have the benefit of looking back and seeing that they couldn't see at this time. I just ask that you would bless each person, that the rest of the week they would have a good week. And as in any large group of people, we have many needs, Father, and we ask that you move mighty. Touch those that need your healing touch, encourage those that need encouragement. And we would ask that you help us to be a light among dark. Father God, we thank you for this blessing. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thank you all very, very much.